everybody dies. Every couple eventually loses a spouse.
Many people don't know the value of what a death certificate is about.
A death certificate absolutely is more than just a piece of paper.
Whenever a genealogist looks back,
If you're married and it doesn't say that, that's terrible.
a death certificate is your final record of your life on earth.
And that last official record should be accurate.
So it was totally appropriate for John and Jim to say, we're going to fight for this.
John never really had to tell me. I know his father called my sister and I, and he said, John is gay. And I thought, yeah.
We met through a mutual friend. I was 26, John was 27. John was one of the most generous people I've ever known.
He was charming when he was little. He was charming when he grew up.
He just had this magical way of talking to people and making people feel comfortable and just making friends.
I met Jim after they were a couple. I loved Jim when I first met him because it was obvious that he was madly in love with John, and I knew how happy they were. They laughed, they talked, there was 100% devotion. I think the relationship between John and Jim was very much one fulfilling the other. John being the outgoing one, the funny one, and Jim being the big fan and the one that made the practical decisions. And during the illness, those practical decisions were made in such a way that John never had to feel like he was just a sick person in a bed.
When the Windsor decision was released in June of 2013, striking down part of the Defense of Marriage Act,
Won everything we asked and hoped for.
I leaned over to John in his bed, hugged him and kissed him and said, let's get married. We weren't able to simply go to our local courthouse, which is 6 blocks away, to get a marriage license because Ohio does not allow same-sex marriage. So we had to figure out how to get married and where to get married and how to get John there safely because he was bedridden due to ALS. I posted something on Facebook. I thought a friend or family member might know someone who worked for a medical charter jet company. And immediately my family and friends started commenting. Through their generosity, they covered the entire $13,000 cost of the medical jet. So we flew to Baltimore Washington International Airport, and John's Aunt Paulette married us on the tarmac in Baltimore.
At this point, every time you wanted to reach out and touch John, you wanted to make sure it didn't hurt him. I mean, it took everything he had to be transported to that plane. And I looked at him and I thought, who could possibly find anything to be against with these two beautiful men so devoted to each other for 20 years? With this ring, I be wed.
With this ring, I be wed.
We probably used the word husband a couple hundred times a day because it just felt good.
It was so meaningful to all of us, but all of us was their friends and family. We had no idea what the impact would be.
4 days after we married, we were introduced to a civil rights attorney.
I did take a blank death certificate to our meeting and shared with them how it would be filled out. It would be blank for surviving spouse, and it would say not married. I mean, the last document that says to the rest of the world, I'm a person, I was married, and this is the man I loved, would be wrong.
4 days after you get married, that's pretty devastating news. We talked it over and we decided to file suit, asking that when John died, his death certificate be filled out, listing him as married and listing me as his surviving spouse. We filed suit against the state of Ohio and the city of Cincinnati, and the city solicitor stood up in court in our very first hearing and said, "Your Honor, the city of Cincinnati agrees with the plaintiffs, and we will not fight them on this."
This is amazing for Cincinnati, what used to be one of the most conservative cities in the United States.
We had passed a human rights ordinance back in 1993, and the human rights ordinance said it's illegal to discriminate against people based on their sexual orientation.
They want to be elevated from a behavior-based lifestyle to a true minority status that would give them special rights.
Folks in the local community got so upset about that they repealed it.
Part of the behavior disorder.
They amended our city charter. They said that gay people can never have any rights against discrimination. The city became the target of boycotts. Cincinnati became this island of intolerance.
Cincinnati has changed dramatically over the past 10, 15 years. That law was repealed in 2004.
They declared the day they got married, John Arthur Jim Obergefell Day.
The city has turned a new leaf.
John's concerned from the start, as he said multiple times, "You know, Jim, I can't do anything. This will all be on you." And a lot of people question, why are you doing this when John is dying? Why don't you spend all of your time and energy just being with John? Well, we made those promises to love, honor, and protect each other. It was a way for us to live up to our promises to each other, those commitments. Even now, knowing that John would die only 3 months later, I would make the same exact decision.
I went down to see. I remember when I left, I said, "I love you, you sweet baby," and he mouthed the words. And then Jim called. He died that night. My husband and I went to their condominium, and they had several friends there, and they were all in the living room. And I was doing all right, but I turned and I saw Jim by himself in that little room.
When I was a younger man, I thought that funeral directors, being so close to death, would have more appreciation for life. I found that it's up to me to live that if that's my choice. Part of the reason that I'm in funeral service has always been public service, really. It would be an ethical dilemma for me to not serve someone properly, whether they're gay or not.
I think it's hard for me to say whether or not it was surprising when Robert Grunn joined the case. He was our funeral director.
By having a person whose job it is to fill out death certificates, to have that person as a plaintiff expands the justice that we're securing. It was a big deal.
Over the years, I have taken care of a lot of different gay couples. When I would write friend on the death certificate as opposed to spouse, it felt incomplete. A lot of times, gay couples can have some family issues may come up. People who have been in relationships the family has not fully recognized. Partners have had to step aside and let the family just take over. And I know that sometimes they've been left out. The spouse is the first one in line for next of kinship. And that's something that we're very aware of.
I do feel a connection with Robert.
It's been really empowering to see Jim's devotion.
He cared for my husband's body, and he treated it with respect.
It's the intensity of love that causes the degree of pain, and it's also the degree of love that will get you through the pain.
Once we knew it was going to the Supreme Court, well, that was wonderful.
Even Jim Obergefell's husband's death certificate will not reflect the fact that he was married or the name of his husband. The state has no legitimate interest for denying them the dignity of that last fact.
John is with me. I fill him in on what happened every day. He was with me in the Supreme Court room. And later that same day, when I walked out of the building and down the steps, and the crowd roared, that was the moment I've missed John the most since he died. Because he wasn't there with me, specifically, physically, to experience the day.
We all deserve the same civil rights, the same fundamental rights.
No.
I know it's very difficult now to keep up with Jim Obergefell.
This looks bigger.
You are Jim, aren't you? Glad to meet you.
He's just become the face of it.
What made you that brave?
I don't know.
I mean, it took a lot of courage to take those steps.
I got pissed off.
Did you? That was it?
Honestly, that was it.
I think that what motivates Jim to keep going
We suddenly had the opportunity to marry.
is knowing that if he succeeds, he's given the ultimate legacy to John.
I can't say I ever thought I would be involved in a Supreme Court case. It has made my career more meaningful to make differences in whosever life I can.
To be on the brink of full marriage equality is extremely exciting and extremely nerve-wracking.
People come up to me and thank me and hug me and wish me well. I don't feel like I'm going through this on my own in any way, shape, or form. The fact that I am still fighting this fight and talking about John every day, it's really helped me with my grieving process. Because John is still very much alive for me.
This morning, the Supreme Court recognized that the Constitution guarantees marriage equality.
John's and my decision to marry and then to stand up for ourselves and to not take it, that's going to be in history books. This has changed my life in so many ways.
I could just see John with this big smile on his face going, whoever would have believed this?